Hello, hello, and welcome to the next episode of Fook Live. I think there was supposed to be audio on that, Michael. I couldn't hear anything. Just FYI. New intro, though. Thanks to Michael for that one. Lovely, shiny new intro. Yeah, so today, episode 3, we're talking about incredible brands and what you can learn from them. So we're going to be diving into some of our favorite brands, not necessarily the biggest brands, maybe brands you haven't even heard of, but we're going to be diving into those and picking them apart, telling you what you love, what you can learn from them, and trying to give you a bit of actionable lesson on what you can do with the kind of the brands that we choose. So you might notice that Matt isn't here today. If you've joined us before, our normal host, we miss him dearly, but he wasn't able to join us for this episode. So you're going to have to make do with just us three for this one. Yeah, so quick introductions, same as usual. You've got Michael, Fook's photographer and videographer, Tia, the lead designer, graphic designer at Fook, and myself, I'm the writer and the marketing strategist. Okay, so intro's done, credit for the animation done.
Thank you.
Let's dive straight into it. So yeah, we're gonna go through some of our favorite brands, share some inspiration with you guys, and let's kick off with Tia. What brands have you brought to us today, and why'd you love them?
Well, so the brand that I have today is a company called Meatable. And essentially, to sum up what they do, they make cruelty-free meat with science. So what's so interesting about them is how they tackle the problem of meat consumption through their service. So essentially, their premise is that climate change is an ever-growing issue. Meat consumption plays a role in that, particularly through the lens of factory farming. So on one hand, you have, a set of people that think that the solution to the issues that our meat consumption cause is to drop meat altogether. On the other hand, you have a group of people who think, we've been eating meat for hundreds and hundreds of years. Why should we get rid of it from our diet? I don't see anything wrong with it. And so this company tackles the problem that meat consumption isn't the problem, it's factory farming. So, so essentially what they do is that they use, the deep science that they've figured out, and they're actually able to grow meat, authentic, real meat, using the DNA from, cows, chickens, and whatnot. So that's kind of, for me, a really interesting problem that they're solving, and a really interesting brand, because they're not picking sides. It's actually a solution that would both appeal, I believe, to the side that kind of sees meat as a whole as a problem, and mostly through the ethical and kind of environmental cost point of view, and at the same time it appeals to people who don't necessarily want to give up meat, and gives them a way to enjoy the meat that they've come to know and love, without necessarily bearing the burden of the horrible imagery you see around factory farms and animals stuffed into cages 2 sizes too small. So that's sort of the idea. So what do you guys think about that?
Sounds good. Yeah, sounds exciting. Like, what is it then? Like, obviously they've got a product that works, but what is it then from a brand point, like a communication point of view? Like, what is it that makes them so effective there?
Well, so what they did was they leaned on exactly the kind of sentiment, almost in the opposite way of what we see with like the Impossible Burger or the Impossible Meat or the Beyond Meat. And so, you see a lot of messaging from those companies that say, it's not meat, but it's just as good. And they've actually taken on the message of almost embracing like a meat lover's attitude, saying this is meat. Every aspect of this is meat, and the hook of it is that it didn't come from an animal necessarily. And that
right, so it's cruelty-free real meat.
Exactly, and so they bring that, with their branding, they really present that. They created a whole range of communications that sort of harbor to this kind of like a 70s postcard old school vibe, where they show animals that are retired living in like kind of green patches and idyllic places, because it's like, hey, like they're out of a job, and it kind of addresses the fact that it's like we often see meat production with, again, horrible imagery of like, and it is, because it is horrible, of animals being mistreated, and kind of countering that with imagery that is actually quite freeing, and again, it's sort of this like almost like Swiss Alps kind of retired lifestyle that again directly appeals to the sort of thing that people who are perhaps vegetarian or vegan and have made those choices for ethical reasons. That's exactly the sort of imagery that they would want to see in their meat consumption, and at the same time it kind of presents a new standard of natural, without necessarily bogging themselves down with this is science and it's fake, it's synthetic, it's actually real. And so they completely lean into that sort of traditional, almost like you're getting it from an actual butcher, even though it didn't come from it wasn't butchered from an actual animal. So
right, and it's real meat, right? Like it's
100% real. Yep.
Is it that kind of that, is it the authenticity angle, do you think, like in terms of like what it is that you could take away, something that they've done really well? It's like they own the fact that they're not trying to trick anyone, they're not trying to win people over and say this is like they own what it is, but there's through that authenticity and there's like that transparency that they kind of, that's how they make their message resonate.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. It's the fact that in reality, they're actually a science company, but they've branded and portrayed themselves as a food company, much like with the same tone that you see like local farmers and all that stuff. Part of the message of things like Beyond Meat is that they really push the idea that they've somehow figured out this scientifically perfect alternative. And what these guys do is that they don't present their product with science, they present it with love, much like the same love that you find real, genuine, authentic farmers who aren't factory farming have for their animals. It's reflected in the fact that this company is a science company, and not a traditional animal pasture sort of group.
It's interesting because like it's a perfect time for a product like this to come out, because like being environmentally friendly is so top of mind. And
exactly.
So from their perspective, I guess in their brain too, it's like, it's really something people want. And I feel like there's a ton of meat eaters out there that really like eating meat, but do also care about the environment. And like, this is like a perfect option. It would be a perfect option for someone who's maybe they're trying to limit their meat consumption, but it's really difficult for them. But having an option like this, where it's like, you can still have meat, but also care for the environment at the same time. It's a perfect timed option for that group of people.
So then, first of all, obviously, if you're listening and you have any questions or comments to throw in, there is a handy little box underneath the stream. So feel free to chuck us questions and comments.
We are monitoring it.
Yes, we are keeping an eye on that. That's Michael's job. So Tia, then obviously, great brand, great product, but people are here to listen and learn about branding, not about meat alternatives. So what is it then that what is it that they've done well that you could distill from that and say, look, take this lesson from them, and this is the lesson that you can learn and you can apply?
The lesson I think that they portray the greatest is being honest with your benefit. I think so often brands, for one reason or another, perhaps they don't actually have something good to offer, or perhaps they're not as confident and they see, other messaging out there and it makes them doubt themselves. It's like, no, like what you're offering, what your business, your service, your product is offering is unique. It provides a benefit that your competitors don't. And all you have to do is be straightforward with that. Exactly like Meatable. That's exactly the attitude they took. If you look it up, you'll see it's meat. They present it plain and clear. We make meat, grown using science, and they don't hide that fact, and it actually ends up working out better for them in terms of how people perceive. So the lesson essentially is be authentic with your benefit, and you don't need anything more than that.
I think there's that consistency, there's the authenticity part. There's also the consistency thing. It's like when your brand is built on that promise, make sure that's consistent throughout. Like if that's your value proposition, then your branding should grow from that value proposition, and that's how people remember what you do and why you do it, is because everything is pulling in the same direction. All right, so that was
Amazing.
Meatable. Love it.
Wrap on Meatable.
Any other brands that you've brought to us today, Tia?
I don't want to steal the show from you guys. I think, seeing how long we've taken.
We'll see what's Michael got. What have you got for us?
I'm coming up next. My incredible brand to present is Kodak, the photography company that, FYI, went bankrupt in 2012.
Controversial choice.
The controversial choice because I'll try to get through it as fast as I can so I don't take up too much time. But this is an example of an incredible brand who got away from what it was that made them an incredible brand, and that's why they went bankrupt.
Bit of a cautionary tale in here.
It's definitely kind of a cautionary tale because they make a crucial mistake and the biggest photography company in the world disappears. So let's get into it. Okay, so the mission of Kodak, they believed in making photography available to the world and making it possible for anyone who had the desire to take great pictures. So they wanted to make photography available to everyone. And their first big marketing campaign was, you press the button, we do the rest. So that was their brand experience. You press the button, we do the rest. And their mission, photography for everybody. That was the big vision. So they built mass awareness and dominated the market in the 20th century. Before Kodak, photography was a pain, very technical, very complicated. And they introduced innovations early on to make it more available to the photography enthusiast, the amateur photographer. In the 1900s, they were selling cameras loaded with film so that you could literally just click the button, take the picture. You'd mail the camera back to them. They'd develop the photos, reload the camera with new film, and send that back to you.
It's like how Netflix does it.
Yeah, literally, all you had to do was click, off you go. This is basically before disposable cameras. That was like the first thing when we that kind of evolves into disposable camera. Another huge thing they came out with was a line of film called Kodachrome. And basically the massive perk of this line of film and other lines of film they had after this was that when you purchased it, the cost of developing the film was in the price of buying it. So after you used the roll of film, you wouldn't have to go for a second transaction to get it developed. You just brought it back to Kodak and they develop it, no questions asked. So they kind of removed that step that other film companies were making their customers do, where you buy the film, take it, and then buy the development process. Kodak eliminated that second step and did it all in one. So that was hugely popular for them, and that really helped them dominate film sales. And so these kinds of innovations for Kodak made photography less of a headache and made it really easy for photographers and amateur photographers. The next thing they did that was huge was Kodak ran a massively successful marketing campaign. You guys may be familiar with this, called Kodak Moments. It was used to refer to any moment worthy of a photo. They understood that people tend to take photos at emotional times, and Kodak capitalized on this to the point that people associated the Kodak brand to life's meaningful moments. And so
very nice.
We're talking about like getting married, your kids, your child's first steps. You know, they positioned themselves right against these moments, you know, to really empower their customers. And so when we're talking about getting to the top level of brand awareness, empowerment is where you want to be, and Kodak really got themselves there to the point that you couldn't capture an important moment without Kodak.
And so just to kind of like to keep on the kind of the brand point there, it's like their focus was always, it was not the technical, it wasn't like the technical aspect of what made their cameras so good. It was customer benefit, customer benefit, customer benefit.
We handle all the technical. You capture the moment, you click the button. We're making it available to everyone. That is the core of what Kodak was. And so basically, to cap off this, their success, 85% market share with cameras, 90% market share with film in 1976. Jeez. So if we end the story there, they're just an incredible brand. They knew exactly what photographers needed. They innovated to make their brand relevant. The marketing campaign with the Kodak Moments really helped them become an empowering brand for their customers. And then going back to their brand identity, because I haven't spoken about that, kind of their red and yellow brand, if you guys are familiar with it, you just give them a quick Google, but they had a really punchy red and yellow color. Kodak was very
iconic.
Memorable. Sorry?
Iconic.
Very iconic, to the point that when you were searching for film on the store shelves, that yellow box stood out. So like it was very loud and dominant because you were looking to capture that perfect memory, and Kodak was always right there drawing customers into them at the photography stores. So again, if we ended the story there, they're just an incredible brand, and that's it. But the story doesn't end there.
There's a big butt coming.
there's a big butt coming, and that's why I think Kodak's a great example, because they had it all and they also lost it all. So the core of Kodak's business was film. Okay. They would even often give cameras away for free because you can't use a camera without film, and you can't get photos printed without film. It's the magic little piece to the puzzle. So Kodak was well positioned to translate into digital photography when it came around. They were the biggest photography company by a long shot when digital became a thing. And the big kicker is they actually invented digital photography. It was their invention. So if they went full digital, every photographer and every customer would have fallen right into the digital space. But because of their risk aversion, and I'm just going to refer to my notes on this one, their risk aversion and unwillingness to kill its old business meant the world went digital without Kodak. Instead of thinking about the average photographer's needs, hence the you press the button, we do the rest, they were thinking about how do we sell more film and keep film as the most important product in photography.
And so then, just to kind of keep this brand focused, then like the issue then was that obviously you can say like risk averse, whatever, as a business, but as a brand, their problem was they didn't follow the customer. They put their desire to sell their product ahead of listening to where the customer was going. And exactly. That kind of, you go from Kodak Moments where they're all about the customer, all about that focused target. And then they've shifted. Actually, they're very much, they're looking to themselves. They're looking at what they want instead of where's the market going.
Exactly. They made it all about the manufacturing and the product itself, and weren't thinking about their customer anymore, when that's how they originally started. You press the button, we do the rest. We want to make photography available to everyone who desires to take a great picture. Okay, so digital presented itself, and that is the next step in that journey. And Kodak saw it and said, this is not as important.
So what's the lesson here, Mike? Like if you're, if we, people that are listening, they're not going to own billion-dollar photography companies. Maybe they do.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, exactly.
But what's the lesson here? Like what do we take away from this as a cautionary tale?
I think the biggest lesson about this whole thing with Kodak is that a great brand, an incredible brand, positions themselves next to their customer, and they're worried about what their customer needs versus whatever they can produce in a factory somewhere. And so I think great brands are always focused on their customer. And Kodak, as soon as they stopped focusing on their customer, they went bankrupt.
And it was, I think, we were talking last week about like the fluidity of brands. Like no brand should be stagnant. Like it should, it's like Kodak was attached to film, but film wasn't their brand. Like the brand is, it should be customer face. It should be, benefit driven and value driven.
Exactly. Your product is not your brand, and I think that's something that's a trap Kodak fell into, and that ended up killing their business. It won't always be that bad for everybody who might make a bad decision like that or go down a bad path, but for Kodak, that was game over.
I think another interesting thing is that, like, I think when people think about branding or brand or how do they present their product, it's like we often fall into the trap of thinking, how do I get my product? Um, my brand has to represent my product, it has to represent the features and all that sort of things. And I think it's almost a learning lesson that you should always be tying your brand into a greater idea, into an emotional sentiment, much like they did about the Kodak moments. It's not about the
It's not
camera.
product, it's not just product, it's not function,
It's
it's
about what it
attached, it's more
means to
authentic.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think if I could make like my last point about it, again, like the Kodak mission to make pictures available to anyone, and you hit the button, we do the rest. That statement is true today. Kodak didn't deliver it though. They were on the right path. They had the right idea to this point that it is true, but other companies are now doing it better than they are.
And I think it's that was so nicely distilled. You click the button, we do that. It's value. It's like you capture the things that matter to you. We'll do everything else. It's like you have to keep your brand has to focus on who it's serving, and once you lose sight of that, bad things can happen.
Exactly.
All right, Kodak. Well, I'm going to bring it back. I'm bringing it back from the 70s, right the way into the 2010s. But Michael, I think your Zoom name is Mikhail Wood at the moment.
Oh my god!
Don't want to confuse the people here.
It's Michael.
His name is Michael. So I'm gonna jump in with the brand that I've chosen for today, which is WeTransfer. Now I think I've kind of spoken about this before, but what I love about WeTransfer is that it's such a simple service. I don't know if you've ever used WeTransfer. It's a file transfer system essentially, where you just emails have very restrictive file. The ability is up to like 25 meg, I think, still somehow. So WeTransfer came along and it was like, okay, you can do gigabytes of files at a time. And the great thing about WeTransfer is two things: is that they know their purpose, they own that purpose, and they know who they exist to serve, who their brand crusaders are, like who that real sweet target is. They center their entire brand around these things, around their purpose. Very clear and consistent communication, and I think that the value that then adds to them as a brand is that it drives loyalty. So if you've used WeTransfer before, if you haven't, WeTransfer.com. This isn't sponsored by anyone, but if you go to WeTransfer, it's incredibly simple as a user interface. It's just the file you want to attach, the person you want to send it to, and then the rest of it is just space on the website. Mm-hmm. And often you'll see that they have art in the background, and everything is very art driven. They feature artists, and they're always representing artists. And that's because creativity is at the core of what they do. Their service is sharing large files, and that initially was great for people like Tia when they've got InDesign files that can be hundreds of megabytes, video files for Michael that can be gigabytes and gigabytes. And so everyone but me, I use Word docs.
You could just email your
yeah, email's fine.
Those are stored online already.
So their service is used by creatives sharing large files, and so the love of creativity and the creative process is at the heart of who they are. It's at the heart of their identity. And so that's something that they've never lost sight of. And so when you visit their website and you see this artist's work in the background, they champion that. It breeds this authenticity that they genuinely care about the people that they serve. And as a brand, they're there, they're there to help. It's more than just a file sharing system. It's something that it exists to serve something. And this kind of love for creativity, this love for the creative process, was really nicely captured in an out-of-home campaign, big billboards they did called "You Create, We Transfer." And so you had these huge billboards where the initial billboard was just like screenshots of emails that were shown creating like the discussions of the campaign, like they were like discussing what campaign they were going to create. And then so you had these emails of saying like, let's get this asset, send us this. And then they switched the billboards out to the result of those discussions, which were like big pieces by these artists and things like that. And so in kind of following that from like inception to execution, like the whole thing was a celebration of the creative process. And it's so true to their brand. And so, obviously these sound lovely, like great, they support artists, but like, what is that? What's so good as a brand? Like, how does that serve them? The thing is, it makes them more than a file sharing service, as I've said. It's a company that cares about people, and that authenticity, that consistency in saying who you're for, that drives loyalty. That makes people love a brand. So then when I think I need to send a file, I don't think twice about using WeTransfer. Like, I actually love WeTransfer. It's a file sharing system. Why should I love it?
Yeah.
But I do, because it feels like it's not just a technical product that exists on the internet. It's actually something that has a purpose. And so that means people come back, they feel attached to that. They feel like that's a brand that adds value to them. And it's a brand that they remember and they build a relationship with because they created this identity. And so, yeah, it earns that loyalty, and all of that, like all of these benefits is just by having, them knowing who their audience is, and always keeping that in mind and consistently serving those people. And so obviously the product is great, or you always need a great product, but having the great product is one thing. Making people want that product is the other half of the battle. So they've created a great product, but then making people want that was the other half.
I think one of the great things they've done with their brand, I think you kind of said it, was like kind of use with their consistency, but it's like, as someone who uses WeTransfer as well, it's like I really feel like it's for me. And I think how they've kind of position themselves for me to actually feel like it's made for me, and how you said they're targeting creatives. It's kind of a basic service in the way that their website does one thing: it transfers a file. But to have that loyalty to kind of a website that has one function is almost remarkably strange. But
yeah, exactly.
Like, their brand is so strong that if I need to send a file, it's going to be WeTransfer, to the point that, it's like this whole industry of having file sharing. It's like WeTransfer is kind of like the Zoom of sharing files. It's like they kind of are on that type of trajectory because, they've done such a great job with how they kind of consistently market themselves and put themselves out there.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's the lesson, it's know your audience, know why you exist, and then build your brand identity from those things. And when you do that, you have consistency, you have authenticity, and when you have that, people remember you, and then they build a relationship, and then you're like me. You don't think of using anything but WeTransfer.
I think another like interesting thing is like, so the part where when you go on WeTransfer and they present artwork, you can actually explore that further, and it's actually called We Present, and that's
really
yeah. So they kind of have almost like a secondary service where it's almost like an art blog. But what I think is really interesting about what WeTransfer did is, they didn't necessarily brand themselves as just a file transferring service. They branded themselves as a necessary platform for creative work. And what's really interesting is that companies have a really hard time about trying to tie themselves to more aspirational goals, especially when it's something as simple as transferring files. What's aspirational about that? But by doing so successfully with their kind of branch of We Present, not only do they kind of secure the loyalty of their customers, but they actually present themselves almost as authority. They gain this level of credibility of representatives in the art community, that in the fact that they might even one day, in a post-COVID world, throw a massive international art festival, and they're able to, because of the work that they've done on their brand, to establish themselves as the forefront of creators.
Yeah, and that's aspiration. That's the other thing. It's like, brands can aspire to be more than the product that they offer, and I think that's a great example with WeTransfer. And yeah, that it's that emotion that we had from Kodak. It's like you're not just a product. You're not just this technical thing. There's actually there's an emotional part of you. There's a human side of it. And I think that's humanity. I think in any brand is people need to be able to see something that they relate to, and art is obviously something that kind of we relate to fairly universally. But that was WeTransfer, and that's why I chose it. Anything else to throw in on that one, guys?
Well, I actually want to just come back to a comment Tia just made, because I think it's also a really good point when we're thinking about brands and really good brands in general, that companies have a hard time attaching themselves to aspirational goals. I think incredible brands do that well. I think bad brands, they might not think beyond, finding a good service that they offer.
Yeah.
Kodak, they had that kind of aspirational goal. WeTransfer has that. Those are like what was it called? Meatable?
Yeah.
It was Meatable? Meatable
Mhm.
has that aspiration. I think that's a really important element for great brands to have, because it gives them somewhere to go. And
I
they're
think
not just, full of nothing on the inside.
And I think, building off of that, it's like, we choose brands and services that help provide us, a service that helps solve a problem in our life. But we also choose brands as a way to reflect our own identities about who we feel we are and how we signal that to other individuals, which is where the whole aspirational thing comes in, which is why people who want to see a change in factory farming will go to Meatable over the other products. Why people who want to, push art more will use WeTransfer over other file services. It's not just because they solve that unique problem in a way that works, but it's also because it's a way for people to kind of paint a picture about who they are. And actually, I feel good about who I look like, and in fact,
part of that.
Yeah, exactly. They want to be seen as individuals who are associated with the values of that brand.
For sure.
Yeah, I think that's
and I think, so yeah, the kind of the lesson there is know your audience and really speak to them and build an identity out of that. And I think something that's quite universal across the ones that we've spoke about, Meatable, Kodak in the 70s, and then WeTransfer is like, there's their value proposition is clear. Whether it's like that, they've within that value proposition, it might be that the audience was very well targeted, like in WeTransfer, or the kind of value that they were adding was very well targeted, like in Kodak. It all comes down to that value proposition. And it's like, once you define your value proposition clearly, that's the first step. Do that, and then brand identity is built from a value proposition. Your marketing assets are then built from that brand identity. And that's how you have authenticity. That's how you have consistency, because everything comes from that one place. And that's how brands are built, as opposed to just a company. That's how you build a brand that has long-term relationships with customers, deep relationship with customers. And I think, that's kind of the universal lesson between all of them. But I do believe, we've just run over our 30 minutes, which is the time we promised the people. But just we'll answer a couple of questions, and then we won't take up any more of your time. So if you have to go, thank you very much for joining us. If you want to get in touch, you can drop us an email. That's create@fookcommunications.com. And get in touch. We're all on LinkedIn: Tia Koo, Alex Wilson, Michael Wood, and Instagram @Fookcom, FOOKCOMM. So if you have any questions, anything that you agree with, disagree with, brands that you love, let us know. And we'll
also let us know which brand you loved the best from the ones we presented,
so we know who won.
so we know who did the best.
So we'll answer a couple of questions then, guys, and then we'll wrap it up there. So we had a question here from Daniel, and it was on Kodak, actually, Michael.
Nice.
So you spoke about they did a very good job of defining that value proposition and that kind of who they're speaking to, and tying it to an emotional experience rather than a functional, like, this is how our cameras work. Can you kind of speak to how the visual identity, their brand identity, like the branding itself, the visual part, like, was a reflection of that?
Well, I think when you look at a lot of Kodak's marketing, I think the main thing that sticks out to me, and you guys tell me if you agree, if you're familiar with it at all, is their consistency across everything. Because if you look at the history of them, like, Kodak was not like the name of the founder. Like, Kodak was a name they chose because they thought it really fit kind of the landscape they were entering in. And so, I think the way they were just positioning themselves as like capturing moments and memories, and just kind of the consistency they had through all their marketing campaigns, and really showing off their red and yellow to the point that you really recognize that on the shelf, because that was like the main interaction for people, is that they would see the marketing campaigns, they would see that kind of color scheme, and when they walked into the camera store, they could pick it out from afar. So
consistency there was that kind of strength.
So I think it was really about the consistency of their visual identity that really helped them win in stores, because people were building up that emotion and that relationship with them. And so they just had to make that transaction in the store. And Kodak was very smart about making sure they only had to do it once. All they had to do was buy the film one time. They didn't have to do another transaction to get developed, so that they were always kind of in the Kodak ecosystem. So I think, again, the consistency with the visual identity was, I think, a huge part.
Great. And then we have another question. Tia, do you have anything to add on Kodak? Or
No, I agree with everything. Yeah.
So on the WeTransfer point, we have a question. So WeTransfer, TransferWise, are those confusing as brand names? Should you be careful about what your brand name is when you have companies like TransferWise, which is the money transferring app, and WeTransfer, which is a file transfer app? And I think that's a valid question. It's actually interesting because TransferWise have renamed and rebranded to just wise.com recently.
Yes,
so we can't speak to their motivations, but that could be part of it, because I think especially when you're entering that kind of a digital transfer space, I think there is, you do have to be careful around like TransferWise, WeTransfer, like they're two different names, but I think, yeah, there could definitely be confusion there around naming, and that it could be part of the reason why they dropped the transfer and they just went for wise.com. But I think, yeah, that's definitely, I think that comes down to almost like a bit of a market research point. It's like, I think you can have similar brand names can exist, but I think especially when you're in a similar area like digital transfers, it might be a bit of like due diligence to kind of, is anyone using, because the operative word is transfer in both of those, so yeah, I think there's definitely a lesson there in clarity in your identity.
Yeah, I think that they're so close that it is kind of problematic in a way, because they're transferring and they're digital, that it feels like they're very much in the same space, even though they're doing very different things. But being careful about choosing your brand name, I do think is important. I do think it's important to look around you before you choose a name, so that doesn't kind of happen to you. For sure.
I think one of those things too is that, when you're naming your company or creating an identity for your brand, it's like, it's better to own 100% of your space than 50-80% of someone else's space. So it's like, why include the word transfer? There is already a transfer out there. You're not going to make another pop drink that uses red and white like Coca-Cola. Why compete there? You're not going to outdo them most likely, and the journey will be harder. So, stick to your own guns, and you're going to get a lot farther that way.
Yeah,
for sure. And this is I'm going to ask you a question here, and then we'll leave it there, because then we've had 10 minutes of questions. But on the Meatable, so we spoke about brand promise, value proposition. Is there anything, as the designer, anything visually about them that you think is particularly, carries the authenticity that you mentioned as their brand? But what is it? Is there something like similar to the question that was asked about Kodak? Is there anything in the Meatable brand identity that you think speaks very clearly to their brand promise?
If you go look up some of their work, if you just do a simple Google,
you see my screen?
Yeah,
very nice.
That's exactly it. What I love about it is that, I mentioned this before, but there's not an ounce of science in there. If you switch up those words, that could have been a local farm, and I think that's the brilliant part about it is that because of the utilizing the unique position of their product, they're actually able to make this sort of idyllic presentation that we often associate with big companies trying just to appeal to the organics side of us, the free range side of us, but it's a lie. It's not an actuality. And what they do here is that they actually lean into that, but because of their product, it's actually true. And not only that, it's actually kind of humorous. It's almost like, at first you almost think that they're representing let's just grow animals in a more organic way, and then all of a sudden you realize that there isn't a single animal in there. There's one piece that they had where they say something along the lines of, no animals were harmed in the making of this, and then bracket, no plants either. And it's just it just absolutely paints both sides of a quite polarizing community.
And I think it's a really great example as well where writing comes in and plays its role as part of branding as well, is because with a lot of products that are technical, and there's so many brands where like let's say there's a lot of R&D that's got into like what they've produced. And so when it comes to actually talking about it, they can't help but be really technical, because they want people to be like, look how complicated this thing is. And like, like this is the science that went into it, because they want to like impress people and show people how much research went into it. But if you look at this, it's like, just use they're not reinventing the wheel with the words that they're using. It's just be very clear. You don't have to go into the science. You don't have to impress anyone. Just be clear about the value that you're adding, not just to me if I bought it, but to us and like to humanity, really. And it's like, just speak to the value. No one cares about the process that went into creating it. No one cares about how difficult it was to make, how many years of R&D, the process behind making it. What's the benefit? And the clarity in the writing here, I think, is a really, it really speaks to that, and that kind of that brand promise. And I think it's writing just the same with imagery and with design. It's like it all has to pull in the same direction.
I think what's great too is that the weird parallel that it has with the imagery of like, that you find like organics presenting themselves as, is that, with them, it's like we almost, with those kind of organic companies, it's almost like, well, we raise them in a really, well-fed place. It's beautiful. It's got space, fresh air, but at the end of the day, we're still killing them. And these guys use the same imagery, but the only difference is that this is their retirement. They're at home, like this is actually the core promise of what is appealing to see animals on a farm like that, is the fact that they are living good lives. Of course, in traditional farming, it's always kind of prefaced with the end of the fact that, you live in paradise only to die at the end. But here it's like, this is the end of their story. Their story is on a farm, and that's where they spend their days.
I think it's a really good example of design, imagery, writing, all a very important part of a brand identity, and they all have to pull in the same direction and tell the same story. And that story is defined at the value proposition level. And I think really that's the big lesson from all of them, is be clear in your value proposition, be clear who you're talking to, and everything grows from that. And then you get that depth, you get authenticity. And then once you start to build that brand, like a brand that is authentic and has a soul and has substance, people start to love it. And then that's a long-term, relationship. You've been like Meatable. It's not just, I don't know the brand names of the farms that produce meat, but actually that could be a meat company that you're like, that's the meat people that I buy from, and that's what branding does. It attaches you to producers of things. But we don't want to take up too much more time. We've answered a few questions, covered a few brands. As we said, if you want to get in touch, you can drop us an email, create@fookcommunications.com, head to our website, fookcommunications.com, or hit us up on Instagram @fookcom. But that's kind of it for us today. Unless there's any closing comments from you guys. All good? All happy?
Nothing here. Keep branding.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you very much, guys, for watching, and we'll see you in episode 4.